see. I'm seeing a number of people logging in, and thank you all for joining us for this webinar. Why don't I get, in interest of time and in sensitivity to the fact that you all are giving up a half an hour of your day, get launched, and I think more people, it looks like, are coming in as we go. But I wanted to start by saying that we're very excited about being able to have this webinar and host this discussion about offering compliant payment programs. What we're going to cover today is to have a very quick discussion about the problem as we see it and some solutions that we at CMC would offer. But before I do that, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background logistically. So we welcome any questions that you have. There's a space in your GoToWebinar toolbar on the right where you can ask any questions, and we will either address them at the end, or if we can't get to them in the 30 minutes, what we'll do is get back to you individually with responses. And appreciate very much all of your questions and your participation. This is a kickoff in a series of webinars we'll be holding monthly. The idea being we're going to try to talk about topics of great and current interest and see where the FlexCollect solution makes sense to you in terms of providing you with the benefit that you're looking to get at. In this particular one, we're going to talk about compliance specifically as it relates to payment programs. There have been a lot of recent turbulence, which we're going to address both from what are people hearing and from the standpoint of, can you know the mind of your regulators, and absent knowing their mind, can you at least make sure that what you're doing is defensible, and what solutions can we provide in that regard? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So this whole topic was kicked off in terms of a comment we heard from one of our clients about hearing from their OCC examiner that, quote, payment programs offered on the web are not what we want to see, unquote. And I'm just curious, and so, you know, knowing the past issues with our regulators and the fact that they make statements that are at many times contradictory. If you've had OCC regulator examiners in, you know that sometimes one examiner will look at the same thing another examiner looks at and give you a completely different answer. So I'm curious to hear from the people. Maybe we start with a little poll. And I'm curious, just in terms of the attendees, how many of you have had an OCC regulator? Oops, have you had an OCC regulator in your organization in the last 60 days? Let's just get a quick show of hands on that in the next several seconds. I'm just curious. Our experience with our clients has been that not only are they having OCC regulators in, but in many cases concurrently they're having CFPB regulators in, they're having sometimes the thrift folks in at the same time. So it looks like the majority of folks on the call have this experience. It looks like just about 2/3 of us have had the FCC in the last 60 days, so that's interesting. So when we first heard this, we were obviously concerned, and we went to our other clients and we talked to several consultants we know, and they were hearing all sorts of things. So we actually talked to an auditor, an examiner, who very recently left the OCC, and we said, what's this about payment programs? And we got a very different story than what we were hearing sort of tangentially. So I wanted to quickly ask another poll question, which is, of the people here on this webinar, are you the ones who actually heard what your examiner said to your organization, or have you heard from somebody who heard from somebody? Because I'm curious myself on how that works. Again, show of hands is very quick. Because as we asked people what exactly is it the examiner said, I've spoken with one client who was in the room when the examiner started by saying, you know, we're not very keen on these payment programs on the web. And I then asked my client, what does that mean? And they said, well, we never really addressed it directly with the examiner. I want to address what we were told by the recently retired examiner, which is not that it's about offering payment programs per se. It's more about, are we in conversation with the customer. So it looks like only 1 out of 4 of us on this call were actually the ones who were talking to the examiner. So you're in the same straits as I am, because I wasn't in those meetings with the examiner either, and dealing with sort of secondhand information. But let's go to the source document. If we look at the uniform policy and look specifically at the paragraph about making program offers, there's a lot of language which we'll cover in just a second, and it really relates to what the documentation has to be for the examiner to act on. And as always, it's subject to a lot of interpretation. So what I want to do is break it down and talk very specifically about this policy, where it says the documentation that we're to provide, is to show that the personnel communicated with the borrower, that the borrower agreed to the program, and that they have the ability. Now, talking more to not just the OCC, but the CFPB, who are, as we know, also in our faces, what has come through both from this examiner and from the CFPB and from the clients we've talked to is that there seems to be more and more of a notion of, we don't want offers that were preconditioned prior to the conversation. We don't want a model-driven or a one-size-fits-all approach, but rather what we really want is to know that what you're doing is based on a conversation or based on input from the borrower directly. So this leads me to just a curiosity. Again, show of hands would be great. I'll have to open this up. In your case, in your organization, do you guys today make individualized payment program offers that are pre-modeled for a given customer? So I'm curious about the difference between having the system spit out an offer, whether it's an agent conversation or whether it's a web interaction, and trying to find out if you're doing that today or if you're using sort of judgmental guidelines for the agents. Can leave it open another couple seconds. It looks like it's pretty evenly split between the yeses and the nos, but we used to. So I'm going to thank you for those responses and move on, because what I wanted to point out was that we're getting a very clear indication from our contacts with the regulators that it's more about individualizing the offer based on feedback from the customer, however you get it, than having the pre-modeled offers. So the scales seem to be tipping in the direction of, we have to show the regulator that we're individualizing our approach, and that seems to be the key thing that they're after. And not only in collections, for those of you on the call, we're seeing it in other areas as well. The OCC has come back to some of our clients and said, you can't even do credit line increases the old way of a pre-modeled credit line increase. What you have to do now is go back and verify stated income. So this is a slide that shows one of the processes we put in place for a client to capture that information in a dynamic survey, which is a CMC capability, do the decisioning of that individual based on their input, and then provide them with a credit line increase as appropriate to the responses that they've given, obviously capturing that response and making it available to any regulator who wants to know not only did you interact with the borrower, but did you make a fair and consistent decision. The guidelines on re-aging also include pretty clear definition of what the MIS needs to look like. And so they say that management should ensure internal controls are established and maintained so that any of these programs can be adequately controlled and monitored by management and verified by examiners. And that obviously is the key bit, is how easy is it to prove that what we're doing is what they want us to be doing. So if you net out what the guideline says and what the regulators are telling us, it becomes very clear that they want us to be able to individualize the program offers that are being made. They want that to happen in dialogue with the borrower. And obviously you've got to capture and therefore be able to document the borrower's agreement in order to prove not only that the dialogue took place, but that you have evidence of their willingness and ability. And here I'm going beyond the safety and soundness dictum of the OCC and adding the fact that we have to answer to the CFPB, because, of course, CFPB tells us they want us to help people protect themselves from themselves, right? So We want to prove that we have evidence of willingness and ability, upon which evidence we have a fair and consistent decision on what offer to make that is unbiased in its application, and that you have borrower input and agreement to the program that you've offered being the right program for them. So let's jump into solution mode. Obviously and thankfully, FlexCollect gives you the ability to do all of that set of requirements. This is an example of a dynamically generated survey that can be presented to a user upon entering the Flex site, the customer-facing web portal, so that you can create a series of questions to capture information. And that series of questions is completely and dynamically controlled by you, both what's in the question, what do you do with the data element that you capture when they answer the question, how much control do you give to the user over the ability to retake a survey, as well as when and where and to whom you present the survey. All of those things are under your control dynamically within FlexCollect. So the example here is a very simple INE that asks for income, living expenses, housing costs, and income after fixed expenses, but you can make it say and do anything you want it to say and do. At the end of which you can have the decision on that specific individual account re-decisioned, so that based on this fresh input, you can present one or several offers, and you can prioritize which offer or offers go in what order and how many you show to the user on the website. That would allow you to immediately claim that the offer itself was fairly and consistently made because a computer did it. There was no judgment other than the strategist's set of rules, which are conscientiously applied by the computer, and that the borrower has the right to review and see as much information on any of the offers as the borrower wants. And interestingly, our experience is that the average user on our CMC website is staying on the site upwards of beyond 10 minutes. And when I first saw that statistic, I was baffled by, it's not that many screens. How can it take them that long? And obviously what's going on is that people are looking at what's possible and then going and conferring either with their spouse or with their own budget to figure out what they can do, and approaching this dialogue pretty thoughtfully, which again is another statistic that can be provided to the regulators. So in the case of the web, what we have here is the ability with the CMC FlexCollect product to both prove the interaction with the borrower through the dynamic survey capability, capture whatever data you need to, at the individual customer level, be able to verify that you've captured the evidence that you need for willingness and ability, in combination possibly with other data elements you have about that customer. Because it's systemically controlled by you, what programs do you offer and when and in what order do you present them, you can prove a fair and consistent program offering, which is individualized to each unique borrower experience. So both the offer that you give, the redecisioning of that offer based on the fresh information if you choose to do that, based on customer input on the fly, and the prioritization of the offers means that you can now give an account level audit trail, which is really key. I can, with FlexCollect, prove at the portfolio level what my rules are and how they're consistently applied, but I can also prove that Mrs. Jones came in at 11:44 on December the 4th, entered the following pieces of information, and I systemically made her these offers, and she selected this particular program, and then agreed that she was in agreement with that program and willing and committed to paying that, all of which is captured at the individual account level and easy to provide to the auditors, in addition to the aggregate data about how you're verifying that your policy is followed and implemented. It's implemented because the system doesn't allow you any other option. The program rules that your strategist sets, the decision trees for segmenting which accounts get which offers, and the data that you capture in the survey are all available at the individual account level, as well as reporting in the aggregate as well. So I think the letter and the spirit of what the OCC are asking for and the protections that the CFPB would like us to put in place to protect our customers are implemented when you have a dynamic survey capability like FlexCollect. And maybe part of the issue is that that the regulators aren't aware of this capability and its deployment. So we're working on that. I've got an appointment to go see the folks at the CFPB in mid-January, and working on trying to get in front of folks at the OCC. So if anyone on this call has any leads for us there, or could provide us with names and contacts of people that need to understand what systems can do, we'd love that help. So please send those to us if you can. The key point here is that a lot of the online payment systems that exist and are in production that aren't FlexCollect do not have this dynamic survey capability. And so they do precondition an account with a certain offer based on what the adaptive control system decided last night. And when I log in, I get those program offers. And I believe that's what the OCC are saying they don't want. What they do want is something along the lines of what we can offer with dynamic survey capture with FlexCollect. Now the question I have for you all is, does this apply only to the web interaction? Because clearly we can handle that with FlexCollect. If you're using FlexCollect as your online payment mechanism, that's great. But what about the agent interactions? If the agent's interaction is all verbal and the evidence that you can provide is notes that the agent captures, the written policies that purport to create fair and consistent offers, but ultimately the offer a borrower gets is relegated to the judgment of that collector, that's what we're all nervous about, right? Because we can't necessarily control the collector, and unlike the computer and the strategist who are both much more consistent and get paid a lot more, you know, you've got your collector, which is somebody at the lower end of the scale, who's got your fate in their hands if it's all judgmental and based on the notes that they write. So what can be done about that is a question. I'd like to first get a sense from you all. Do you have, just again, show of hands real quick, I'll throw this poll in front of you. Do you have today the ability to individualize the programs and also capture the customer response when you're talking at an agent level now? I'm not talking about online. So does your current agent desktop give you the ability to render that decision less judgmental and more systemic, and then capture that the system's offer is the one that the customer is using? I'm still waiting a couple more seconds. It's been our experience that a lot of us out there still are using sort of, you know, guidelines. This is what I can do in bucket 1. This is what I can do in bucket 2. It turns out like it turns out that about 2/3 of you are saying you have the ability to systemically individualize your programs, which is great. Good. So how does FlexCollect do it? In the case of FlexCollect, we have the ability to create that same survey that you saw on the web and make the agent step through that same set of data capture elements. So just as the customer needs to provide the information and you capture it and then decision on it on the web, you can make sure the agent dialogue is capturing those same pieces of information and then generating the same set of offers. Because it's running off the same set of decision rules, you have the ability to make the exact same claim when it's an agent interaction that you can make when it's a web-based interaction. And from the standpoint of the OCC, that examiner that had recently retired said to us, well, look, if I could do this systemically, whether it's a collector or web, the key part is I need proof of the dialogue, I need proof of the fair and consistency of the offers that were made, and I need some audit level that shows me the audit trail that it was actually consistently deployed. So the advantage FlexCollect offers is unifying not just the rule set that lives on the web, but unifying that same rule set to drive the interaction that happens at the agent side as well. So we can work, as you know, as both the full collections platform or as just the digital front end. And when we act as just the digital front end, we can tightly or loosely, depending on your organization's capabilities, integrate to the decisioning that you're using at the agent desktop so that it's consistent. And if you're not using us to do that, that's a conversation that you should have with your client executive, because it's something that would be very interested in talking about. So I'm going to summarize and then open up for questions here in a second. Clearly what we were setting out to do at CMC from the beginning was to create individualized payment programs driven by the strategist with very explicit selection criteria and explicit program offer terms that would be flexible across many different payment program types: min dues, re-ages, settlements, payments in full, match pays, all different manner of payment programs. And we wanted to have an account-level audit trail of all of the inputs, whether they came through a conversation with the agent or through a web, or for that matter, any of the other channels of communication, so that you can prove that all the program offer decisions were made both fairly and consistently regardless of the channel. So as an additional sort of, oh, by the way, I would also add that because of the dynamic survey capability and the workflow management at the agent level, you can not only handle things like the I&E example I showed you, you could also be capturing express consent, for example, or capturing updates to email addresses or mobile phone addresses and so forth, and do all of that information capture, whether they've come to the website and you say, aha, Jim here has never been to the website before, but now that he's here, I don't have express consent on file. I'm going to show him an express consent question before I get into the rest of the regular dialogue with them. And if Jim calls in and is talking to your agent can be prompted to collect that information right there on the spot in a consistent way. And we're going to jump next month into the whole disclosure and document compliance, but I'll give you a little preview that this system can also generate dynamically the actual disclosure text for the agent and at the website, and capture the person's disclosure acceptance as well, but getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. With regard to payment programs, obviously the key benefit you're looking for is operational risk. What can I do to manage that? And inherent in any agent judgmental decision is an increased risk to having to answer for something that an agent did or said that wasn't necessarily what you would like them to have done. Obviously, to the extent you can use the system to capture data and to make the decision on that individual account on the fly, it's a no-brainer, was what the examiner told us, that it's more consistent and provable. And obviously the reason is we'd like to not be in a position to not have to get programs, because programs are a great way to decrease losses when we need to come to an accommodation with the customer. And if we are limited in our ability to do that, it obviously has an impact on our losses. So we want to make sure that you use FlexCollect to not be so limited in that way. So that's really what I had for the webinar today in terms of content, trying to stick to our promise of doing this in under 30 minutes. Obviously, if you've heard things you like or things you want to know more about, this would be a great time to jot down Garrett Baird's email address, gbaird@CMCAgile, and send in any questions or comments that you have. I think that in terms of any feedback you have about this webinar content, other topics you'd like to have us talk about explicitly, we're open to that. We have in mind to talk next time about how you would do compliant contact strategies, and then another one on disclosures and document compliance. But obviously we're going to go where you guys want us to go, and adjust where it needs to be adjusted so that we're covering content that you guys want to have us cover. So in terms of questions, the only thing that I've seen here so far, you guys are being very polite, is can CMC really ensure that the questions are the same between the web and the agent? So let me answer that question. Yes, we can. because we have the flexibility in Flex Center, for those of you who already are using the system, I see some of our current clients on here as well as some soon-to-be clients, we have the ability within Flex Center to define the set of questions or workflow tasks and then assign those workflow tasks to a given individual. So if John Jackson meets a certain set of criteria in your decision tree, they are going to be presented with the same set of questions, whether they come to the agent conversation and the agent brings up that customer's record, or whether they come to the website. Now you have the ability, if you want, as well, to make them different, to present different experiences at the web than at the agent desktop, and that's all managed in the roles and users part of your portfolio setup, as well as at the individual workflow or survey level. You can determine whether you want that to be presented web only or agent only or web and agent. So you have full flexibility on that one is the answer. But yes, we can ensure, you can ensure that the same set of questions and obviously the same set of decisioning on those questions is applied in both cases. So I'm going to wait another minute or two. You guys are being very bashful. I only see the one question. I see another one. So let me just try to make that visible to me. Curious if any other banks have gotten feedback from the OCC about whether willingness and ability can be established through a self-service app like IVR or web is the question. On the specific subject of web, we have not talked directly to the OCC yet, and obviously every examiner seems to be different. But as I mentioned, the examiner that told one of our clients that they wanted, that they were wary of these offers, it turns out they were wary of the pre-configured ones. And in the case of the examiner very recently, and I mean within the last 90 days, recently out of the OCC, that examiner was very explicit about whether you capture it on the web or whether you're having an agent conversation is not the issue. The regulation doesn't say you have to talk to them with an agent. The regulation is saying you have to be able to document that you got borrower input and agreement and that you made a fair and consistent offer. Don't know about IVR, and if anybody wants to throw into their question if you've had any feedback on that. Many of you know me from Adeptra days, and back in the Adeptra days when we had this sort of issue in with Oftel in the UK, they were unaware of the fact that we could actually capture responses during an interaction on the IVR that could then be auditable, and they were delighted when we had that capability. So part of this is an education of your regulators and your specific examiner to make sure they know what you're doing when you use Flex Collect versus when you use one of the other sort of static products. Okay. I don't see anybody else opining, but if you do want to send any of your thoughts on that last topic, you know, we're going to be sending out a post-webinar survey to get your feedback, and really we want to make this valuable to you guys. So to the extent we're not covering the things you want to cover, you know, please let us know that, and we will make sure that we're covering what you want to cover. Other than that, it's been a great 30 minutes. And I really appreciate your time and listening. It's kind of a bizarre format since I do all the talking. But I know you guys are all nodding and waving goodbye, and it's been a great day. Have a great lunch. Talk to you all later. Or in the case of the European folks, have a great dinner. Take care. Thanks a lot.